Sometimes the strongest warriors hide their scars beneath silence. Sometimes the most decorated soldiers walk among us without fanfare or recognition. And sometimes, in the middle of a brutal military training exercise, a single moment can shatter every assumption, challenge every prejudice, and reveal a truth so powerful that it stops a seasoned colonel dead in his tracks. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a woman who endured ridicule, faced discrimination, and carried secrets that would make grown men weep. But when her past was finally revealed through ink etched into her skin, it didn't just silence her critics. It changed the entire culture of Fort Braxton forever. What happened when that tattoo was exposed wasn't just about one soldier's vindication. It was about honor, sacrifice, and the dangerous assumptions we make about the people fighting beside us. Because sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who's already proven they're willing to die for the person next to them. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training grounds at Fort Braxton, casting long shadows across the obstacle course that would challenge even the most seasoned soldiers. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood at attention with her unit, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead as Drill Sergeant Thompson barked orders that echoed across the compound. At 28 years old, Maria had the lean build of someone who had spent years conditioning her body for combat. But to many of her male counterparts, she was just another woman trying to prove herself in a man's world. "Listen up, soldiers!" Thompson's voice cut through the humid Georgia air like a blade. Today's exercise is designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. We're running a full combat simulation with live ammunition, hostile environment navigation, and emergency medical scenarios. Some of you think you know what it means to be under pressure. Today, you'll find out if you're right. Maria felt the familiar knot of tension in her stomach, not from fear of the exercise ahead, but from the sideways glances and whispered comments from the soldiers around her. She had been dealing with this for months since her transfer to Fort Braxton. Despite her exemplary service record and multiple commendations from her previous assignments, many of the men in her unit seemed to view her as a liability rather than an asset. Private First Class Jake Morrison, a 22-year-old from Texas with a swagger that exceeded his actual combat experience, leaned over to his buddy Private Collins. "Hope Santos doesn't hold us back today. Last thing we need is dead weight when the bullets start flying," he muttered, intentionally loud enough for Maria to hear. Collins, a burly man from Ohio who had made it clear he didn't think women belonged in combat units, chuckled. "My money's on her calling for a medic before the first hour's up. These diversity hires always crumble when things get real." Maria's jaw tightened, but she maintained her military bearing. She had heard worse throughout her career, and she had learned long ago that the best response was to let her actions speak louder than her words. Still, the constant doubt and disrespect wore on her more than she cared to admit. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had already faced combat situations that would have broken half the men standing around her. The exercise began with a forced march through the Georgia wilderness, carrying full combat gear in temperatures that soared above 90 degrees. Maria fell into the familiar rhythm of putting one foot in front of the other, her breathing steady and controlled despite the oppressive heat. She had learned to endure far worse conditions during her deployment in Afghanistan, though she never spoke about those experiences with her current unit. As they navigated through dense, woodland terrain, Morrison continued his running commentary. "Check it out, boys. Princess is actually keeping up. Maybe she's tougher than she looks." His tone was mocking, designed to undermine rather than encourage. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a respected NCO with 15 years of service, finally spoke up. "Morrison, keep your mouth shut and focus on the mission. We're all on the same team here." But Morrison wasn't finished. "Just saying, Sarge, when a shooting starts, I want someone I can count on watching my six. Not someone who got their stripes because the Army needed to meet a quota." The comment hit its mark, and Maria felt a flash of anger surge through her chest. She had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, but She knew that defending herself verbally would only give Morrison and his supporters more ammunition to use against her. Instead, she channeled that anger into her performance, pushing herself harder and moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had navigated hostile terrain under enemy fire. The first phase of the exercise took them to a mock village constructed for urban warfare training. The scenario involved clearing buildings while under simulated enemy fire, requiring split-second decision-making and seamless teamwork. As they approached the objective, Drill Sergeant Thompson divided them into fire teams, each responsible for securing different sections of the village. Maria found herself assigned to Morrison's team, along with Collins and 2 other soldiers. As they received their briefing, Morrison took it upon himself to assign roles without consulting anyone else. Collins, you're on point. Davis, you cover our flank. Peters, you're with me on entry. Santos, you stay back and provide overwatch. Try not to shoot any of us by mistake. The condescending tone was unmistakable, and Maria realized that Morrison was deliberately trying to sideline her from the main action. Overwatch was an important role, but it was also the position furthest from the immediate danger, which would give Morrison more fuel for his narrative that she couldn't handle real combat. Understood, Maria replied simply, though internally she was calculating how to turn this situation to her advantage. As the exercise began, the sound of blank ammunition filled the air, creating a cacophony that simulated the chaos of actual combat. Maria took her position on elevated ground overlooking the village, her rifle scope providing a clear view of the entire area of operations. What she saw through that scope would prove crucial to the success of the mission. Morrison's team moved into the village with textbook precision, clearing the first building without incident. But Maria's trained eye caught movement in a structure that had supposedly been cleared by another fire team. Enemy role players were repositioning themselves to ambush Morrison's team as they moved to their next objective. Through her radio headset, Maria tried to warn them. Hostile movement in Building 3, second floor, northeast window. You got incoming for your 2 o'clock. Morrison's voice crackled back with irritation. Negative, Santos. Building 3 is clear. Stop seeing ghosts, and let's do our job. Maria watched in frustration as the enemy role players moved into position. Her finger hovered over her radio transmit button as she debated whether to insist on her warning or trust Morrison's dismissive judgment. Years of military training and hard-won experience told her to trust her instincts, regardless of the personal cost. Movement confirmed in Building 3. She transmitted again, her voice calm and professional. 3 hostiles, second floor, preparing to engage her position. Santos, I said negative. Morrison snapped back. Stay in your lane and let the real soldiers handle this. The words stung, but Maria had bigger concerns than Morrison's ego. Through her scope, she could see the role players raising their training weapons, preparing to eliminate Morrison's team with simulated fire that would end their part in the exercise. In a real combat situation, those men would be dead in seconds. Without hesitation, Maria adjusted her aim and fired 3 quick shots, striking each of the enemy role players with the marking rounds used in training exercises. The sharp cracks of her rifle echoed across the village, followed immediately by the whistles that signaled eliminated enemy combatants. Morrison's team froze in confusion, unsure where the shots had come from or what had happened. It wasn't until the exercise controllers confirmed the elimination of the 3 hostiles that Morrison realized what had occurred. Nice shooting, Santos, came Rodriguez's voice over the radio. You just saved Morrison's team from a total wipeout. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria continued to provide overwatch as the exercise progressed, spotting and eliminating several more enemy positions that other teams had missed. Her accuracy was remarkable, each shot finding its target with the precision that came from extensive combat experience. When a village clearing phase was complete, Morrison's team regrouped at the rally point. The other soldiers looked at Maria with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect, but Morrison himself seemed even more agitated than before. "Lucky shots," he muttered, refusing to make eye contact with her. "Anybody can be a sniper when there's no real pressure." Collins nodded in agreement, though his support seemed less enthusiastic than before. "Still think she's going to crack when things get really tough. This is just training wheels compared to the real thing." Maria said nothing, but Staff Sergeant Rodriguez caught her eye and gave her a barely perceptible nod of approval. At least someone recognized her competence, even if others remained determined to ignore it. The next phase of the exercise would take them into a swamp environment designed to test their ability to operate in challenging conditions while under simulated chemical attack. As they prepared to move out, Maria checked her equipment one final time, unaware that this next phase would begin to reveal capabilities that would shock everyone present, including the commanding officers who were observing from a distance. Colonel James Mitchell watched the exercise unfold from the observation tower, his experienced eye noting the dynamics within each unit. A 30-year veteran with combat deployments spanning 3 different conflicts, Mitchell had seen every type of soldier the Army produced. He prided himself on his ability to assess talent and potential, but even he was beginning to take notice of the quiet competence displayed by Staff Sergeant Santos. "Interesting shooting," commented Major Williams, Mitchell's aide-de-camp, as he lowered his binoculars. "That Santos has some serious marksmanship skills." Mitchell nodded, making mental notes about the exercise so far. He had been hearing reports about tension within the unit, complaints from some soldiers about the integration of women into combat roles, and concerns about unit cohesion. What he was observing today suggested that the problem might not be what some people claimed it was. As the soldiers disappeared into the swamp for the next phase, Mitchell settled in to watch what would prove to be a revelation that would change his entire perspective on Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and force him to confront some uncomfortable truths about the culture within his command. The swamp phase was designed to be the most physically and mentally challenging part of the exercise. Soldiers would navigate through waist-deep water, thick vegetation, and simulated chemical contamination while completing a series of tactical objectives. It was the kind of environment that revealed who soldiers really were when stripped of comfort and convenience. Maria waded into the murky water, feeling the familiar weight of her equipment as it became waterlogged. The chemical protection mask made breathing difficult, and the combination of heat, humidity, and physical exertion created conditions that had broken stronger soldiers in previous exercises. Morrison, still smarting from his earlier embarrassment, seemed determined to prove his superiority. He pushed hard through the swamp, trying to set a pace that would leave Maria behind. But as they progressed deeper into the exercise, it became clear that Maria's endurance and tactical awareness were far superior to what anyone had expected. She moved through the water with efficient, economical movements, conserving energy while maintaining tactical awareness of her surroundings. When Morrison stumbled and nearly lost his weapon in the murky water, it was Maria who quickly helped him recover it without breaking stride or calling attention to his mistake. The gesture caught Morrison off guard. Despite his hostility toward her, she had acted instinctively to help a fellow soldier in need. For the first time since she had joined the unit, he found himself questioning his assumptions about her character and capabilities. As they approached the final objective of the swamp phase, an emergency scenario was introduced that would test not just their physical capabilities, but their ability to perform under extreme stress while making life-or-death decisions. None of them knew it yet, but this scenario would be the catalyst for revelations that would change everything. The emergency scenario began without warning, as the best military training always did. Maria was pulling herself out of a particularly deep section of swamp water when the sharp crack of simulated explosive devices echoed through the humid air. Immediately, the exercise controller's voices boomed through speakers hidden in the vegetation, announcing that the unit had encountered an improvised explosive device and taken casualties. Medical emergency. Medical emergency. The voice was urgent and realistic. Multiple casualties, immediate medical attention required. This is not a drill. Even though they all knew it was part of the exercise, the simulation was designed to trigger the same stress responses and decision-making processes that soldiers would experience in actual combat. Maria's training kicked in immediately, her mind shifting into the focused, analytical mode that had kept her alive during her deployment to Afghanistan. She quickly assessed the simulated scene. Private Peters was designated as having suffered massive trauma to his left leg, while Collins was marked as unconscious with a possible concussion. The scenario required immediate medical intervention and tactical decision-making under pressure while still maintaining security against potential follow-up attacks. Morrison, as the senior enlisted member of the team, was expected to take charge of the situation. But the stress of the simulation, combined with the physical exhaustion from hours of training, seemed to overwhelm him. He stood frozen for several crucial seconds, his training manual responses failing him in the face of what felt like genuine emergency. Morrison, we need to establish a casualty collection point and maintain perimeter security. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, but Morrison still seemed paralyzed by indecision. Without waiting for orders that might not come, Maria moved into action. She had seen this exact situation before, not in a training exercise, but in the mountains of Afghanistan when her convoy had been hit by a real IED and real soldiers were bleeding real blood onto foreign soil. She immediately began directing the response with calm, professional competence. Davis, establish security to our north and east. Peters, I need you to simulate shock and keep your leg elevated. Collins, stay down and don't move your head. Her voice was steady and authoritative, cutting through the chaos of the moment. Maria then turned her attention to Morrison, who was still standing in apparent shock. Morrison, I need you to call for medical evacuation and establish communication with command. Can you do that? Her tone wasn't condescending or challenging. It was the voice of someone who had been in similar situations before and knew what needed to be done. Morrison snapped out of his paralysis and began following her directions, though part of his mind was still processing how smoothly and naturally Maria had taken control of a crisis situation. The exercise controllers, watching from concealed positions, noted the fluid way Maria managed the emergency response. She demonstrated textbook knowledge of battlefield medicine, tactical awareness that kept the team secure while treating casualties, and leadership skills that brought order to chaos in a matter of seconds. What none of them could see was the memories that flickered through Maria's mind as she worked. Images of a dusty Afghan road where Sergeant Williams had lost his leg to an actual IED. The sound of helicopter rotors as they waited for medical evacuation that seemed to take forever. The weight of responsibility she had felt as the most experienced medic present while 3 of her soldiers fought for their lives. Colonel Mitchell, observing from the tower, leaned forward with interest. Through his binoculars, he watched Maria coordinate the medical response with a level of competence that surprised him. Her movements were efficient and confident, suggesting experience that went far beyond what he would expect from a staff sergeant with her apparent background. Major Williams, pull Santos's service record. I want to see her deployment history, Mitchell ordered, his curiosity piqued by what he was observing. As the medical simulation continued, Maria demonstrated advanced battlefield medicine techniques that impressed even the exercise controllers. She correctly prioritized casualties, managed resources effectively, and maintained tactical awareness throughout the scenario. When the exercise concluded, the controllers gave the team high marks for their response, specifically noting Maria's leadership during the crisis. Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his authority superseded by someone he had been undermining all day. As they moved to the final phase of the exercise, he struggled with feelings of resentment mixed with grudging recognition that Maria had potentially saved the entire simulation from failure. Where did you learn medical procedures like that? Davis asked Maria as they prepared for the final phase. His tone was genuinely curious rather than challenging. Standard Army training, Maria replied simply, though the truth was more complicated than that. Her medical skills had been forged in the crucible of actual combat, treating real wounds while under real enemy fire. She had learned not from textbooks, but from desperate necessity when soldiers' lives hung in the balance. The final phase of the exercise would test the soldier's ability to operate in an urban environment under simulated enemy fire while completing a rescue mission. The scenario involved extracting a downed pilot from a hostile area while under constant threat from enemy combatants. As they approached the urban training area, Maria noticed that Morrison had become increasingly quiet. The event of the day seemed to be forcing him to reconsider his assumptions about her capabilities, though his pride made it difficult for him to openly acknowledge his changing perspective. The urban area was a maze of concrete buildings and narrow alleyways designed to simulate the complex environment of modern warfare. Hidden throughout the area were role players acting as enemy combatants, armed with marking rounds that could eliminate participants from the exercise if they were hit. Maria's team was assigned to clear a path to the downed pilot's location, while another team secured the extraction point. The mission required precise coordination, tactical awareness, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. As they entered the urban area, Maria's training and experience began to show even more clearly. She moved through the environment with the fluid awareness of someone who had navigated similar terrain under actual enemy fire. Her positioning was perfect, her communication crisp and efficient, and her tactical decision-making was flawless. When enemy role players opened fire from a concealed position, Maria's response was immediate and devastating. She identified the source of fire, communicated the threat to her team, and eliminated the hostiles with precision shots that drew admiring comments from the exercise controllers. Santos has some serious combat instincts. One of the controllers radioed to Colonel Mitchell. Her urban warfare skills are exceptional. Mitchell was beginning to form a clearer picture of Staff Sergeant Santos, though he still didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. What he was observing suggested a level of experience and competence that didn't match the harassment and doubt she had been experiencing from her unit. As the team moved deeper into the urban area, they encountered a scenario that would push them to their absolute limits. A simulated building collapse had trapped the downed pilot in a confined space that could only be accessed through dangerous and technically challenging means. Maria assessed the situation quickly, noting that the rescue would require someone small enough to navigate through the debris while still being capable of providing medical assistance to the trapped pilot. The logical choice was obvious, but Morrison hesitated to suggest that Maria take the lead on the most dangerous part of the mission. "I can do it," Maria said simply, reading the situation and volunteering before anyone had to make the potentially awkward suggestion. Morrison nodded, though his expression was conflicted. Throughout the day, he had been forced to confront the reality that Maria was not only competent, but possibly the most skilled soldier in their unit. The realization was humbling and uncomfortable for someone who had built his identity around the assumption that women couldn't perform in combat roles. As Maria prepared to enter the confined space to reach the trapped pilot, she began removing some of her equipment to reduce her profile. It was then, as she pulled off her outer protective gear, that the first hints of what lay beneath became visible. The other soldiers caught glimpses of what appeared to be extensive tattooing on her back and arms, though the full extent and significance of the artwork wasn't immediately apparent. What they could see suggested images and text that seemed military in nature, but the lighting and angle made it impossible to make out details. Morrison found himself curious despite his lingering resentment. Military tattoos often told stories about a soldier's service, deployments, and experiences. What he was seeing on Maria's skin suggested there might be more to her background than any of them had realized. Maria entered the confined space with the focused determination of someone who had performed similar rescues before. Her movements were confident and efficient as she navigated through the simulated debris to reach the trapped pilot. Once there, she quickly assessed the role player's simulated injuries and began the careful process of preparing him for extraction. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible, requiring technical rope work, medical procedures, and tactical awareness, all while operating in a dangerous environment. Most soldiers would struggle with even one aspect of this challenge, but Maria handled all of it with remarkable competence. As she worked to stabilize the trap pilot, Maria called out precise medical information and tactical updates to her team. Her voice remained calm and professional throughout the ordeal, providing the kind of steady leadership that inspired confidence in those around her. Patient is stable with simulated spinal injuries. I need the Stokes basket and rope system ready for vertical extraction. Estimated time for safe removal is 15 minutes, she reported. The exercise controllers exchanged glances as they noted the advanced medical terminology and procedures Maria was employing. This level of battlefield medicine suggested training and experience that went well beyond standard infantry qualifications. Colonel Mitchell, still observing from the tower, was becoming increasingly intrigued by what he was witnessing. He had seen thousands of soldiers over his 30-year career, but Maria's combination of technical competence, leadership ability, and calm under pressure was exceptional even by elite unit standards. "Major, did you get that service record yet?" Mitchell asked, his curiosity about Maria's background intensifying with each display of superior performance. "Still pulling it, sir. There seems to be some complexity in her file that's requiring additional clearance to access," Major Williams replied. The mention of clearance requirements added another layer of mystery to Maria's background. Standard infantry personnel files didn't typically require special clearance to review, suggesting that there might be classified elements to her service record. As Maria continued working to extract the trapped pilot, her tactical awareness remained sharp. She noticed movement in an adjacent building that suggested enemy role players were preparing to complicate the extraction. Without breaking concentration from her medical procedures, she alerted her team to the potential threat. "Movement in Building 6, 3rd floor. Looks like our extraction is about to get interesting," she called out, her tone remaining steady despite the increasing complexity of the situation. Morrison positioned himself to provide covering fire, still processing the fact that Maria seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of battlefield conditions. Her ability to manage multiple complex tasks simultaneously while maintaining perfect situational awareness was something he had only seen in the most experienced combat veterans. The rescue simulation reached its climax as enemy role players began engaging Maria's position while she completed the delicate extraction procedure. Under simulated fire, she maintained perfect technique while directing her team's response to the threat. The final moments of the exercise would prove to be the most revealing yet, as circumstances would require Maria to remove even more of her protective clothing, bringing her closer to revealing the tattoos that would change everything. But, for now, she remained focused solely on completing the mission and proving, once again, that she belonged among the finest soldiers the Army had to offer. The simulated gunfire intensified as Maria worked to complete the extraction of the trapped pilot. The exercise controllers had designed this final scenario to push participants beyond their normal limits, creating the kind of pressure cooker environment where true capabilities were revealed. Under the constant threat of simulated enemy fire, Maria demonstrated the kind of multitasking ability that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. While maintaining her focus on the medical procedures required to safely extract the pilot, she simultaneously provided tactical guidance to her team members who were engaging the enemy role players. Her voice remained calm and authoritative as she directed covering fire while continuing her life-saving work. "Collins, adjust fire 30 degrees left. You've got movement behind the concrete barrier." "Davis, watch that doorway on your 2 o'clock," she called out, never pausing in her careful manipulation of the rope and pulley system that would bring the pilot to safety. Morrison found himself following her directions without question, his earlier skepticism overwhelmed by the clear evidence that Maria possessed tactical knowledge and experience that exceeded his own. The smooth confidence with which she managed the complex rescue operation suggested someone who had performed similar extractions under actual combat conditions. The heat within the confined space was becoming unbearable, exacerbated by the protective equipment and the physical demands of the extraction. Maria was forced to make a practical decision that would prove to be a turning point in the entire day's events. "I need to shed some of this gear," she announced matter-of-factly. "The heat is affecting my dexterity, and I can't afford to make mistakes with the medical procedures." Without fanfare or self-consciousness, Maria began removing layers of protective clothing, stripping down to her standard-issue Army t-shirt. As she did so, the extensive tattooing on her arms and back became clearly visible for the first time. What the other soldiers saw took their breath away. This wasn't the random collection of artistic designs that many soldiers accumulated over the years. What decorated Maria's skin was a detailed memorial to fallen comrades, a visual history of combat deployments, and symbols of military units that told a story of service and sacrifice that none of them had suspected. Davis, who had the clearest view of Maria's back as she worked, could make out what appeared to be names, dates, and military insignia rendered in intricate detail. The artwork was professionally done, clearly expensive, and obviously meaningful. This was the kind of tattooing that came from deep personal experience, not casual artistic expression. "Holy shit," Collins breathed, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the exercise. For the first time since Maria had joined their unit, his tone carried genuine respect rather than skepticism. Morrison caught glimpses of the tattooing as Maria maneuvered the rescue equipment, and what he could see forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about her background. The images and symbols suggested deployments, combat experience, and unit affiliations that painted a picture of a soldier with far more experience than any of them had imagined. But even as her fellow soldiers were processing this visual revelation, Maria remained completely focused on the mission at hand. She had learned long ago to compartmentalize personal concerns when lives were on the line, whether real or simulated. The extraction required her complete attention, and she gave it willingly and professionally. Colonel Mitchell, observing from the tower with high-powered binoculars, found himself leaning forward with intense interest. Even from his distant vantage point, he could make out enough of the tattooing to recognize military symbology that suggested a level of service and experience that didn't match Maria's current assignment or apparent status within the unit. "Major Williams, I need that service record immediately," Mitchell ordered, his voice carrying an urgency that made his aide snap to attention. "Sir, I'm encountering some unusual restrictions. Her file appears to be partially classified, and I'm being directed to contact Personnel Command for additional clearance," Williams responded. The mention of classified elements in Maria's service record sent alarm bells ringing in Mitchell's experienced mind. In 30 years of military service, he had learned that when a soldier's records were classified, it usually meant they had been involved in operations or assignments that went far beyond standard infantry work. Back in the extraction site, Maria had successfully stabilized the simulated casualty and was beginning the delicate process of moving him through the confined space. Her movements were precise and confident, demonstrating the kind of technical rope work and medical knowledge that typically required specialized training. As she worked, more of her tattooing became visible to the other soldiers. Morrison caught sight of what appeared to be the insignia of elite military units, combat deployment ribbons rendered in ink, and what looked like memorial tattoos honoring fallen soldiers. Each new detail he observed forced him to confront the growing realization that he had completely misjudged Maria's background and capabilities. The extraction reached its critical phase as Maria prepared to move the pilot through the most dangerous section of the simulated collapse. This required her to position herself in an awkward angle that fully exposed her back to the other team members. What they saw there would provide the final pieces of a puzzle that none of them had even known they were trying to solve. Covering her entire back was an elaborate and professionally executed tattoo that depicted a battlefield scene with multiple elements that told a complex story. At the center was a detailed representation of a military helicopter surrounded by images that clearly represented a specific combat operation. Around the edges were names, dates, and symbols that created a memorial to what appeared to be a significant military action. Davis found himself staring at the artwork with a mixture of awe and growing understanding. He could make out references to Afghanistan, dates that corresponded to some of the heaviest fighting of that deployment, and unit designations that he recognized as belonging to elite aviation units. "Santos," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying a new tone of respect and curiosity. "Where did you serve in Afghanistan?" Maria paused in her work for just a moment, her hands never stopping their careful manipulation of the rescue equipment. "Kandahar province," she replied simply. "Between 2018 and 2019. The time frame and location made Morrison's blood run cold. Kandahar province during 2018 to 2019 had been one of the most dangerous assignments in the entire Afghan theater. The fighting there had been brutal and constant, with casualties mounting daily. Any soldier who had served in that area during that time period had seen serious combat. As Maria completed the final phase of the extraction, bringing the simulated casualty to safety with textbook precision, Morrison found himself looking at her with entirely new eyes. The woman he had dismissed as a diversity hire, the soldier he had assumed would crack under pressure, was clearly someone with far more combat experience than anyone in their unit, including himself. The exercise concluded with Maria successfully completing the rescue mission while her team provided effective covering fire against the enemy role players. The performance was flawless by any measure, demonstrating tactical competence, technical skills, and leadership ability that impressed even the most experienced exercise controllers. As the all-clear signal was given and the soldiers began to gather their equipment, Morrison approached Maria with obvious hesitation. The confidence and arrogance that had characterized his interactions with her throughout the day had been replaced by uncertainty and something approaching humility. "Santos, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "I've been an ass today, and you've proven yourself 10 times over." That was some seriously impressive work. Maria looked at him steadily, evaluating his sincerity. She had heard apologies before from soldiers who had underestimated her, though most were less forthright than Morrison's attempt. "We're all on the same team, Morrison." Today was about the mission, not personal issues. Her response was professional and gracious, but Morrison could hear the underlying message. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, nor should she. He had spent the day undermining and doubting her, and one apology wasn't going to immediately repair the damage he had done to unit cohesion. Collins approached the group with obvious curiosity about the tattoos he had observed during the rescue operation. His earlier hostility had been replaced by genuine interest and respect for what he had witnessed. "Santos, that ink on your back tells quite a story," he said carefully. "Would you mind sharing what it represents?" Maria considered the question for a moment. She had spent months with this unit while they questioned her capabilities and dedication. The tattoos on her back represented some of the most painful and meaningful experiences of her life, memories that she had carried silently while enduring their doubt and criticism. "It's a memorial," she said finally, "for soldiers who didn't make a home." The simple statement carried weight that silenced the entire group. Each of them realized that they were looking at someone who had not only seen combat, but had lost friends and comrades in that combat. The elaborate artwork on her back wasn't decoration. It was a permanent monument to sacrifice and loss. Rodriguez, who had been observing the interactions with interest, stepped forward to address the group. "All right, soldiers, let's get back to the rally point for debrief. Outstanding work today, especially on that final extraction." As they gathered their equipment and prepared to move out, Morrison found himself walking beside Maria, still processing everything he had learned about her during the day's events. The transformation in his attitude was complete, but he was struggling with how to express the magnitude of his changed perspective. "Santos, can I ask you something?" he said as they walked. "What unit were you with in Afghanistan?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering whether to reveal information that she had kept private since her transfer to Fort Braxton. The events of the day had demonstrated that her current unit might finally be ready to accept her for who she really was rather than who they had assumed her to be. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, she said quietly. Night Stalkers. Morrison stopped walking. The 160th SOAR was legendary within the Army, known for the most dangerous and classified aviation missions in the entire military. Their pilots and crew members were among the most highly trained and experienced soldiers in the world. The idea that Maria had been part of such an elite unit reframed everything he thought he knew about military hierarchies and qualifications. The revelation would have been enough to completely change how Morrison and the others viewed Maria, but it was only the beginning. What they would learn when Colonel Mitchell finally gained access to her complete service record would prove even more shocking and would lead to revelations that would change not just their opinions of her, but their understanding of what it truly meant to serve with honor and distinction. As they reached the rally point, Maria was unaware that her partially revealed tattoos had already been photographed by exercise observers, and that those images were making their way up the chain of command to officers who would recognize their significance immediately. The careful silence she had maintained about her background was about to be broken, and with it would come recognition that was long overdue but would carry its own complications. The day's training exercise was officially complete, but the real revelations were just beginning. Colonel Mitchell sat in his office later that evening, staring at the classified service record that had finally been delivered to his desk. What he was reading challenged everything he thought he understood about Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and raised serious questions about how the Army was managing its most valuable personnel. According to the documents spread before him, Maria wasn't just a former member of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She was a decorated combat veteran with 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and commendations for valor under fire that read like something out of a military thriller. The first Bronze Star had been awarded for her actions during a particularly brutal firefight in the Karengal Valley, where she had repeatedly exposed herself to enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers while calling in medical evacuation under impossible conditions. The citation described how she had saved the lives of 4 critically wounded soldiers while her unit was pinned down for over 6 hours. The second Bronze Star told an even more compelling story. During a night raid that had gone catastrophically wrong, Maria's helicopter had been shot down behind enemy lines. As the crew's medic, she had not only treated the wounded crew members but had organized the defense of their position until a rescue team could reach them 18 hours later. The citation noted that her medical expertise and tactical leadership had kept all crew members alive through a night that should have killed them all. But it was the Purple Heart citation that made Mitchell's hands shake as he read it. Maria had been wounded by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device while providing medical treatment to Afghan civilians caught in a crossfire between American forces and Taliban fighters. Despite her injuries, she had continued treating the wounded until medical evacuation arrived, saving the lives of 3 children and 2 women who would have died without her intervention. The photographs attached to her service record showed a different Maria than the one currently serving at Fort Braxton. In these images, she wore the distinctive uniform and insignia of a Night Stalkers, standing beside helicopters and with crews that represented the absolute elite of military aviation. Her face in these photos carried the confident bearing of someone who knew her worth and had proven it repeatedly under the most demanding circumstances possible. Mitchell set down the papers and walked to his window, looking out at the training areas where earlier that day he had watched Maria demonstrate skills that now made perfect sense. She hadn't just been a crew member with the 160th SOAR. She had been one of their most decorated medics, a soldier whose reputation within special operations circles was apparently legendary. The question that tormented Mitchell was how someone with Maria's background and qualifications had ended up in a standard infantry unit at Fort Braxton, subjected to the kind of harassment and doubt that he had observed during the training exercise. The transfer orders in her file provided no clear explanation, mentioning only a routine reassignment for administrative purposes. A knock on his door interrupted his contemplation. Major Williams entered carrying additional documents and wearing an expression that suggested he had uncovered information that was both significant and troubling. "Sir, I've been able to piece together more of Staff Sergeant Santos's background," Williams began. "The situation is more complicated than we initially realized." Mitchell gestured for Williams to continue, bracing himself for whatever additional revelations were coming. According to sources at Personnel Command, Santos requested the transfer herself. Apparently, she's been dealing with severe post-traumatic stress following an incident during her final deployment with the 160th. The transfer to a regular infantry unit was part of a treatment plan designed to help her readjust to standard military operations. The explanation provided context, but raised even more questions. Mitchell had seen nothing in Maria's performance during the training exercise that suggested any impairment or difficulty with high-stress situations. In fact, her performance had been exceptional by any standard. "What kind of incident?" Mitchell asked, though he suspected the answer would be difficult to hear. Williams consulted his notes before responding. Her final mission with the Night Stalkers was a rescue operation that went wrong. A special operations team was pinned down in Taliban territory, and Santos's helicopter was part of the extraction force. They took heavy fire during the rescue, and several crew members were killed. Mitchell felt a chill as Williams continued. According to the after-action reports, Santos was the only medic available during the firefight. She worked for over 4 hours under constant enemy fire, treating wounded soldiers from both the helicopter crew and the ground team they were rescuing. She saved multiple lives, but she also watched good friends die despite her best efforts. The weight of what Williams was describing settled on Mitchell like a physical burden. He was beginning to understand not just Maria's exceptional capabilities, but the emotional cost of the experiences that had forged those capabilities. The elaborate memorial tattoo on her back wasn't just honoring fallen comrades. It was carrying the weight of personal loss and trauma that few soldiers ever experienced. "There's more, sir," Williams continued. "The incident I described was her 5th major combat action in less than 2 years. According to her medical records, she was showing signs of severe combat fatigue and post-traumatic stress. The transfer to Fort Braxton was recommended by Army psychiatrists as a way to help her recover in a less intense environment." Mitchell processed this information with growing anger, though his anger wasn't directed at Maria. The idea that someone with her record and capabilities was being subjected to harassment and doubt while dealing with combat trauma was infuriating. Worse, it suggested that neither he nor the unit leadership had been properly briefed on Maria's situation. "Williams, I want you to schedule individual meetings with every soldier in Santos's unit. I want to understand exactly what's been happening and how we're going to fix it," Mitchell ordered. "And I want Santos in my office first thing tomorrow morning." As Williams left to carry out his orders, Mitchell returned to studying Maria's service record. The more he read, the more impressed and troubled he became. This wasn't just a good soldier who had been underestimated. This was one of the Army's most decorated combat veterans, someone whose expertise and experience should have been recognized and utilized rather than dismissed and wasted. The photographs of her tattoos, taken by exercise observers earlier that day, now made complete sense. What had appeared to be elaborate artwork was actually a detailed memorial to the soldiers she had served with and lost during her time with the Night Stalkers. Every name, every date, every symbol represented a specific person and a specific moment of sacrifice that she carried with her every day. Meanwhile, in the enlisted barracks, Morrison was having his own reckoning with the events of the day. He sat on his bunk, staring at his phone, and the search results he had pulled up about the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. What he was reading made him physically sick with shame. The Night Stalkers weren't just another aviation unit. They were the most elite helicopter pilots and crew members in the world. They flew the most dangerous missions in the most hostile environments, often behind enemy lines, and always under conditions that would terrify normal soldiers. The fact that Maria had been part of this unit meant she had already proven herself at a level that Morrison could barely imagine. Collins appeared in the doorway, his own expression reflecting the same mixture of shame and newfound respect that Morrison was experiencing. "You see what I'm seeing online about the 160th? Collins asked quietly. Morrison nodded, unable to find words for the magnitude of his misjudgment. Every assumption he had made about Maria, every dismissive comment he had made throughout the day, had been not just wrong, but insulting to someone who had already sacrificed more for her country than most soldiers ever would. "We really screwed this up, didn't we?" Collins said, sitting down heavily on his own bunk. "She's been dealing with our crap for months, while she's probably got more combat experience than our entire unit combined." The two men sat in uncomfortable silence, processing the reality of what they had discovered. Both were experienced soldiers who prided themselves on their judgment and professionalism, but they had allowed prejudices and assumptions to blind them to the truth about one of their own. Down the hall, Rodriguez was conducting his own research, driven by professional curiosity about the soldier he had been observing for months. As a senior NCO with extensive combat experience himself, he had recognized quality in Maria's performance, but even he hadn't suspected the true extent of her background. What he was finding online about the 160th SOAR and their role in special operations gave him new context for everything he had observed about Maria's tactical skills, medical knowledge, and leadership abilities. She hadn't just been a good soldier trying to prove herself. She had been a proven warrior adapting to a new environment while carrying the weight of extraordinary combat experience. Rodriguez made a decision that would have significant consequences for unit morale and cohesion. He walked to Morrison's room and found both Morrison and Collins still processing their discoveries. "Gentlemen, we need to talk," Rodriguez announced, his tone carrying the authority of someone who had made an important decision. "Tomorrow, we're going to make some things right." The conversation that followed would lay the groundwork for a transformation in how Maria was treated within the unit, but it would also raise new questions about how to properly support a soldier dealing with the invisible wounds of combat trauma. As the night progressed, word of Maria's true background began to spread through the company, carried by soldiers who had witnessed her performance during the training exercise and confirmed by those who had conducted their own research. The reaction was universal: shame for how she had been treated, and awe for what she had already accomplished. But Maria herself remained unaware of the discussions taking place about her throughout the base. She sat in her own quarters, cleaning her equipment and preparing for another day of what she expected would be the same challenges she had been facing for months. The tattoos that had revealed so much to others were hidden again beneath her standard uniform, and the memories they represented remained locked away in her mind. She had learned to compartmentalize the pain and trauma of her experiences with the Night Stalkers, focusing instead on the day-to-day requirements of her current assignment. The harassment and doubt from her unit members was painful, but it was manageable compared to the weight of losing friends in combat. What Maria didn't know was that her carefully maintained anonymity was about to end. The revelations of the day had set in motion a series of events that would not only change how she was treated by her fellow soldiers, but would also bring recognition and opportunities that she had never sought but definitely deserved. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about judgment, prejudice, and the true meaning of military service. And at the center of it all would be Maria, a soldier who had already proven her worth in the crucible of combat, but would now have to prove it again in the court of human opinion. The morning formation at Fort Braxton carried an unusual tension that rippled through the ranks like electricity before a storm. Maria stood at attention with her unit, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. What she couldn't see were the knowing glances exchanged between soldiers who had spent the previous evening researching her background, or the way Morrison and Collins positioned themselves closer to her than they had in months. Colonel Mitchell approached the formation with a purposeful stride that commanded immediate attention from every soldier present. His weathered face carried an expression of barely controlled intensity, the look of a career officer who had discovered something that both impressed and angered him in equal measure. "At ease," Mitchell commanded, his voice echoing across the training area. Yesterday's exercise revealed some interesting insights about the capabilities within this unit. More importantly, it revealed some serious deficiencies in how we evaluate and treat our fellow soldiers. Maria felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had been through enough military formations to recognize when a commanding officer was building towards something significant, and Mitchell's tone suggested that whatever was coming would not be comfortable for everyone involved. Mitchell's eyes swept across the formation before settling on Maria. Staff Sergeant Santos, front and center. The command sent a chill down Maria's spine. Being singled out in formation was rarely a positive experience, and she couldn't think of anything from the previous day's exercise that would warrant this kind of attention. She marched forward and came to attention in front of Mitchell, her mind racing through possible explanations for what was happening. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Mitchell began, his voice carrying enough authority to silence even the ambient sounds of the base around them. "I've spent the evening reviewing your service record. It makes for fascinating reading." Maria's heart began to pound as she realized that her carefully guarded privacy was about to be shattered. The classified elements of her background were apparently no longer classified, at least not to her commanding officer. Mitchell turned to address the entire formation while keeping Maria positioned where everyone could see her. "Soldiers, I want you to take a good look at Staff Sergeant Santos. Yesterday, some of you questioned her capabilities, her dedication, and her place in this unit. Today, you're going to learn exactly who you've been serving beside." The silence was complete as Mitchell pulled out a folder containing documents that Maria recognized as her official service record. She felt exposed and vulnerable, knowing that her most painful memories and proudest achievements were about to be laid bare in front of the same soldiers who had spent months undermining her. Staff Sergeant Santos served 3 combat deployments with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Mitchell announced, his voice carrying across the training area with crystal clarity. "The Night Stalkers." The reaction was immediate and visible. Soldiers throughout the formation straightened with shock, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe as they processed what they had just heard. Even those who had researched Maria's background the previous evening were struck by hearing it announced officially. Morrison felt his face burn with shame as Mitchell continued. During her service with the 160th, Staff Sergeant Santos was awarded 2 Bronze Stars for valor in combat, a Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and multiple commendations for life-saving actions under enemy fire. Mitchell paused to let the weight of these revelations settle over the formation before continuing with details that made the full scope of Maria's service clear. Her first Bronze Star was earned in the Karengal Valley, where she treated and evacuated for critically wounded soldiers while under sustained enemy fire for over 6 hours. Her medical expertise and courage under fire saved 4 lives that day. Maria stood rigidly at attention, but inside she was reliving that terrible day in Afghanistan. The sound of incoming rounds, the desperate calls for medical assistance, the weight of responsibility as soldiers' lives hung in the balance. These were memories she had worked hard to compartmentalize, and having them exposed publicly was both validating and traumatic. Her second Bronze Star, Mitchell continued, was earned when her helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines. As the senior medic, she not only treated wounded crew members, but organized the defense of their crash site until rescue arrived 18 hours later. Her actions kept every crew member alive through a night that should have killed them all. Collins found himself staring at Maria with a mixture of awe and shame so intense it was physically painful. The woman he had dismissed as a diversity hire had already proven herself in combat situations that would have broken most soldiers. She had saved lives while risking her own, and she had done it not once, but repeatedly. Mitchell wasn't finished. Staff Sergeant Santos's Purple Heart was awarded after she was wounded by an improvised explosive device while providing medical treatment to Afghan civilians caught in crossfire. Despite her injuries, she continued treating wounded civilians until medical evacuation arrived, saving the lives of 3 children and 2 women. The formation was completely silent now, the weight of Maria's service record settling over them like a heavy blanket. These weren't just commendations. They were testimonies to courage and dedication that went far beyond what most soldiers ever experienced. Yesterday, Mitchell continued, his voice taking on an edge of controlled anger. I watched Staff Sergeant Santos demonstrate tactical skills, medical knowledge, and leadership abilities that impressed even the most experienced exercise controllers. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was watching one of the Army's most decorated combat veterans prove herself yet again to soldiers who should have been learning from her rather than doubting her. Morrison felt like he was going to be sick. Every dismissive comment, every undermining gesture, every expression of doubt he had directed at Maria over the past months now seemed not just wrong, but actively insulting to someone who had already sacrificed more for her country than he could imagine. Mitchell turned back to Maria, his expression softening slightly. Staff Sergeant Santos, the treatment you've received from some members of this unit is unacceptable and stops today. Your service record speaks for itself, but more importantly, your performance yesterday demonstrated that you remain one of the finest soldiers I've had the privilege to command. Maria struggled to maintain her military bearing as emotions she had kept buried for months threatened to overwhelm her. The recognition was something she had never sought, but after months of doubt and harassment, it felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. However, Mitchell continued, addressing the formation again. Recognition of past service doesn't excuse present behavior. Some of you have allowed prejudice and assumption to blind you to the quality of a fellow soldier. That ends now. Mitchell's eyes found Morrison in the formation, and his gaze was hard and unforgiving. Private First Class Morrison, front and center. Morrison marched forward on unsteady legs, knowing that his behavior over the past months was about to be addressed publicly. He came to attention next to Maria, acutely aware that he was standing beside someone whose service record made his own accomplishments seem insignificant by comparison. Morrison, yesterday you questioned Staff Sergeant Santos's competence and suggested she might be deadweight in combat. Today, you've learned that she has already saved more lives in combat than most soldiers ever see. Do you have anything to say to Staff Sergeant Santos? Morrison turned to face Maria, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since she had joined their unit. What he saw there wasn't anger or vindictiveness, but a quiet dignity that made his shame even more acute. Staff Sergeant Santos, Morrison began, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. I owe you more than an apology. I've been wrong about you from day one, and my behavior has been inexcusable. You've already proven yourself in ways I can't even imagine, and I had no right to question your capabilities or your place in this unit. Maria looked at Morrison steadily, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. We're all on the same team, Morrison. What matters is how we move forward from here. Her response was gracious and professional, but Mitchell wasn't satisfied with just an individual apology. He had recognized that this was a systemic problem that required a broader solution. This situation has revealed some serious issues within this unit, Mitchell announced. Staff Sergeant Santos has been dealing with harassment and doubt while managing post-traumatic stress from multiple combat deployments. The fact that none of us recognized what she was going through represents a failure of leadership at multiple levels. The mention of PTSD added another layer of complexity to the situation. The soldiers who had been doubting Maria's capabilities now understood that she had been dealing with the invisible wounds of combat, while simultaneously proving herself in training exercises that she could have conducted in her sleep. Rodriguez stepped forward from his position in the formation. "Sir, request permission to address the unit." Mitchell nodded, recognizing that the senior NCO wanted to contribute to the resolution of the situation. "Soldiers," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through years of exemplary service. "What we've learned today should shame all of us. Staff Sergeant Santos has been serving beside us for months, while carrying the weight of experiences that few of us could handle. Instead of recognizing her strength and learning from her expertise, some of us chose to doubt and undermine her." Rodriguez paused to let his words sink in before continuing. "From this day forward, Staff Sergeant Santos will be treated with the respect and recognition she has earned through her service and sacrifice. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me personally." The message was clear and unambiguous. The senior leadership of the unit was making it known that Maria would be protected and supported going forward. The days of harassment and doubt were officially over. Mitchell concluded the formation with announcements that would formalize the change dynamic. "Staff Sergeant Santos, effective immediately, you're being reassigned as the unit's senior medical instructor. Your experience and expertise will be used to train other soldiers in advanced battlefield medicine." The assignment was both recognition of Maria's capabilities and a practical acknowledgement that her skills were too valuable to waste. It also provided her with a role that would command automatic respect from the soldiers she would be training. Additionally, Mitchell continued, "Staff Sergeant Santos will be recommended for promotion to Sergeant First Class, with assignment to the non-commissioned officer education system as an instructor. The Army needs more leaders with your experience and dedication." The announcements represented not just recognition, but career advancement that acknowledged Maria's true worth to the Army. After months of being undervalued and underutilized, she was finally being offered opportunities that matched her qualifications and experience. As the formation was dismissed, Maria found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to express their respect and, in some cases, their shame for how they had treated her. The transformation was remarkable and immediate. Where there had been doubt and hostility, there was now admiration and support. Morrison approached her one final time, his expression reflecting the magnitude of his changed perspective. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my career trying to make up for how I treated you. You deserved better from all of us." Maria looked at the young soldier who had been her primary tormentor and saw genuine remorse and a desire to do better. "Morrison, the best way to make up for past mistakes is to learn from them and help others avoid making the same ones. Be the soldier you're capable of being." As the crowd dispersed, Maria stood alone for a moment, processing the dramatic change in her circumstances. The tattoos that had told her story were no longer hidden secrets, but recognized memorials to service and sacrifice. The capabilities she had demonstrated were no longer questioned, but celebrated and utilized. The journey from ridicule to recognition had been painful and prolonged, but it had ultimately led to an outcome that honored her service while providing opportunities to use her experience to help other soldiers. The woman who had been mocked at training had proven that strength, dedication, and valor couldn't be hidden forever. Colonel Mitchell watched from a distance as Maria finally received the recognition she had always deserved. In his 30 years of service, he had learned that the best soldiers often carried their burdens silently, proving themselves through actions rather than words. Maria Santos was a reminder that true strength often goes unrecognized until circumstances force it into the light, and that the most valuable soldiers are sometimes the ones who ask for nothing while giving everything.